running? I'm trying to wait for my screen to indicate that I'm stamp. And there we go. Whoops, connection lost, reconnecting. Okay, we seem to have a bumpy start, but the timer seems to be running. So let us activate light bulb. My goof up here and pulls out a side menu. Here we go. Let's try this again. Waiting for something to happen here, and come on. Poor little computer. Yeah, we keep on getting a little connection glitches. Clock is still running though, but has lost my screen. We will not give up. We want to run our promo. Okay, let's try it again. Welcome to Evolution Hour, clunkety clunk, clickety clack. On the 16th of March, in our ongoing time of uncertainty and doom. And remember, tortuganwords.com is a word. Currently with our current books. Now, can we see my picture on the screen? Oops, connection lost, reconnecting. There I am, I guess. Okay, so I don't see anybody in the stream, so I cannot be absolutely certain that things are not bumpy and clickety-clack. I'm not sure. But anyway, and the screen is jarringly uncertain here. We are, of course, nearing the end of the chapter. There's only a few little technical sources left to go, and then we'll be going into a screed. And this is also a thing on Royal Truman that popped up on Joel Duff that we will be discussing about the Kulturkampfing nature of Royal Truman and his extremist viewpoints on things. And then a little manna from heaven bit that's going to be in Rocks Wither Volume 2, which is concerns Da Vinci's dragon, which I've alluded to way back in the day, but we'll pull you up to speed on the matter. Anyway, S&T, Sarfati and Tay are trawling around in this end of this chapter to do everything they can to kind of distance anything dinosaurian from anything bird. So the moment it looks like they may have something that's like feathered, then they got to shunt it on over to the avians. We'll cite selectively any technical literature that can be deemed to support that. Usually it's Alan Fiducia, and the bulk of the remainder of the chapter is just a pile up of allusions to Fiducia's various book arguments and a 2018 conversation that was done by email with one of the authors of the book with Fiducia. And we can't confirm what the texts of anything like that on, so I don't even include them as a source citation because it's all proprietary information that there's no way to check up on as to whether or not it's accurate as advertised. At any rate, we do get a paper. We're nearing the end of the technical papers for this chapter they're citing, and it's one from 2002, note that date, from Maryańska et al. Regarding the oviraptorsaurs. These are these weird things with kind of bird-like beak, and they're sort of cousins to theropods and are, by virtually everybody's systematics, are regarded as a still part of dinosaurs. But in Sarfati and Tay's view, relying on this Maryańska paper for the assertion that, quote, some eminent dinosaur experts have argued that it was probably just an extinct bird based on several bird-like features, unquote. details of which Sarfatti and Tay did not describe. So we're going to be looking at a little puppy because it's from Acta Paleontologica Polonica, so it's open access. Whoop, we'll be putting the link up. So here's what as the salient characters. These features include extensive pneumatization, enlargement of the parietal portion of the skull roof, double-headed otic process of the quadrate. And they cite one of their own papers, Maryańska and Osmólska, 1997. Lateral cotyla on the quadrate for articulation with the quadratojugal, Maryańska and Osmólska, 1997 again. Functional loss of contact between the palate and jugal, shallow or rod-like jugal, this one from Elżanowski, 1999. This set of traits is absent in non-avialan theropods, but is present in advanced birds, unquote. So, are they misrepresenting the material? Kinda not, but kinda yes, when we think about the date of the paper being all the way back in 2002, 20 years before Sarfatti and company are running amok. So regarding these traits, the Maryańska paper had said, we hypothesized that these traits, which in ancestors of modern birds developed to permit independent protraction and retraction of the rostrum relative to the braincase, in oviraptorids and probably oviraptorosaurs, became secondarily adapted to make the skull a rigid unit. So that's really the kind of focus. They allude to a peripheral amount of stuff from the not entirely well-known postcranial case skeleton to support their notion that it might be birds. So it's not that this argument was considered claptrap back in 2002 or even in 2004 when they were still fielding material on it in the 2004 edition of a major dinosaur encyclopedia that Kevin Padian was involved with. I have the older version of it in my library. But date being so old makes you wonder, how is that doing now? Because Sarfatti and Tay cite zip in the way of systematics in this area, other than this allusion to this 2002 paper. So we did a little checking, and things had certainly moved on by the time of Amy Balanoff's 2013 doctoral dissertation, which I'll be putting a link up to, where she's talking specifically about the oviraptorosaurs and their systematic classification. She's well aware of Maryańska's paper and specifically indicated that that paper had left a taxa. So it was not exactly the most conclusive analysis because it was leaving too much out. Now we press on ahead to the present, and the argument that oviraptorosauria are just flightless birds is not flying in modern systematics. In fact, it's just invisible today. So I'll be putting a link up to a 2020 paper from Funston et al., which is about a new two-fingered dinosaur found from this group that's clarifying more about the oviraptorosauria. And it's clear that the avialan argument ain't coming up at all. Then Sarfatti and Tay also try to play a 2020 paper when in Martel. Alas, I only have the abstract on this one. It's regarding that Yang paper that we had mentioned earlier in relation to integuments on pterosaurs. And Unwin and Martel legitimately are offering reasons why it's not quite like the stuff seeing on feathers and the feathered theropods. And what's amusing, though, in Sarfatti and Tay try to play this criticism of the Yang paper up as, quote, innovative, having about the pterosaur feathers. Well, oh, I'm getting another oops, lost connection thing as my timer running. We're frozen at 9:23. Okay, we are starting to move again. So slight interruption on that. Anyway, this whole oviraptorosauria issue is indicating the lengths that they're going to be highly selective about what they're citing and what they're not. And so they're trying back on older material. They're relying on Alan fiducia as gospel. And as we've seen in previous episodes, I've been skirting around criticism of these issues like mad, as well as not really developing a counter argument, because there is no such thing as a serious creationist systematics, baraminology notwithstanding. So the kinds of character state analysis, they are not going into it in any great detail. Now, there's a little interlude before I get to the Royal Truman episode that I decided to put the new link up on simply because it's too good to pass up. I've been having the last couple of days a kind of back and forth in a Twitter exchange where a couple creationists have been running amok, one of whom is this idiot Craig from years past. Another one is this Rocky Mountain guy who trawls with little meme pics of yellow highlighted abstracts from papers as though somehow or other the content is critical of one of them is a paper on coelacanth fossils that was quite interesting and is going to be alluded to in the new book, volume 2 of the rocks there. But the other guy is from years at one point throws up an AIG video from just earlier this year, a mind-blowing AIG on dragons being real. Bum, bum, bum. And I almost paid no attention to it at all because we've got a big detailed section on the creationist lore on surviving the dinosaurs as dragons in volume 2. And generally speaking, we're trying in on the stuff that's in print and books, answers books, and that particularly on the endless stream of videos. But this one turned out to be delightfully useful. Joel Lineweber is a creationist who's published in Like Answers Research Journal, and he's been arguing that Microraptor is just a bird. That got an excoriating criticism from Dapper Dino when he did a video on it. But what hit my button, and the reason why it's going to be included in the new book, is that he brings up the Da Vinci dino picture. This is otherwise a pretty peripheral little detail, that the fact that it gets fielded right now this year in an AIG video is just delish. For those who are unaware of it, there are a couple pictures of that Leonardo da Vinci did of various critters, and in the margins are a couple dragons. And I think they're even alluded to as such. And long before this bandwagon, there have been a small number of largely peripheral creationists, although some of them are bumping around at the edges of AIG, which were contending that Da Vinci had seen living dragons because they had lived down all the way into the Renaissance. And this one, it took me all of a half an hour at the time when I first uncovered it to find out what a serious problem there is on that. And that's why when I discovered that Lineweber has decided to jump on this bandwagon himself, means he cannot possibly have done any fact-checking on it. And the neat upshot is that specific at one point in describing how he came up with these dragon designs. And there was a biography on Da Vinci's that quotes extensive from his journals on this point, and saying about how you got to make sure it's looking like things from real animals, and you draw on things like I use a cat for this thing. And at no point is Da Vinci saying, oh, and by the way, I saw lions, which would have been the easy thing to if he had seen a living dragon. No, he was just making up stuff. Patrons occasionally might want to have a dragon motif in a design, and he was perfectly happy to oblige, and I can figure out how to come up with one. By the way, the dragon motifs in the medieval and Renaissance period are way less overtly dinosaurian than the kinds of stuff that you routinely see in modern creationism. And that's because over time, especially because of movies and digital, or even pre-digital in the case of Dragon Slayer, that the idea of dragons as reptilian dinosaurian looking creatures has become the norm in the way they're depicted on screen. They're typically done with quadruped rather than four legs with extra wings attached on, which is sometimes the case as they're depicted in ancient wars. The two-legged wyverns have disappeared. They're not depicted typically in any modern version. You get a thing that's much more like a bat-like form. And in fact, they went through this evolution in doing The Hobbit, Smaug in The Hobbit, where they kind of depicted the issue about whether the wing membranes were going all through the limbs or not. That the first version that was in the first Hobbit movie got changed, and so they had to kind of digitally reconstruct the stuff for insertion in the video versions of the movie, because by the time they got to the second one, they kind of changed how they were depicting Smaug. All absolutely fascinating lore, but it also means that Lina Weber doesn't know how to research the Middle Ages, and it obviously didn't occur to him to even think about doing that. It's absolutely hilarious. There were, by the way, no links to the video or links at the video describing any source material and that. And then there's a small smatter of people who are creationists who have put on comments saying, "Oh, it's just so wonderful. I wish I'd known about this earlier." Well, if you had known about it earlier, you'd have been lied to earlier. So what can we say? So finally, on to our Royal Truman episode. For those, and I'll put it in the, even though there's nobody I'm seeing in the conversation node, because he's an odd character. He's sort of periphery of young Earth creationism. He's been around for years. He does oodles of origins or life things on homochirality and whether particular biological processes could have originated. He's got a long string. I mean, it's a almost continuous screed of material that could be very intimidating to critics to delve into. But that's not the reason why he's coming up on today's show. It's not his origins or life stuff. I found out about this because of a bit from Joel Duff. And he had seen this recent article that Truman did. And I will be putting the link up to that, so you'll be able to read on that. And where Truman described evolution as, quote, the most lavish marketing campaign in history, unquote. And along the way, he's just bringing in allusions to the Third Reich and communist propaganda. It's just a mishmash of ridiculous hyperbole. And it was so ridiculous that Joel Duff just had to go facepalm on it. So he was incensed at this air quotes nonsense. And I'll be putting a link to his video so that you can take a look at that to see his viewpoint on this thing, as well as read the original article. This kind of Kulturkampfing obsessions is a long-standing feature of young Earth creationists. Absolutely up front and center from the 1970s era of Jerry Falwell and Duane Gish on. It still has its counterpart in intelligent design, especially in relation to trying to satisfy evolution and Darwin with a connection to the Third Reich and the Soviet Union. And that element you find just with the apologetics at the Discovery Institute, as you do in the white EC camp. So we'll be calling attention to that in the concluding chapter of Volume 2 of Rocks Were There, of which we are working on that as we speak. And it also will give us a reminder that lurking behind all that contemporary creationism, where they seem to be talking about dinosaurs and genes and chromosome 2 fusion in humans and all this stuff, which can get in the weeds technical, but lurking behind them all is this Kulturkampf, Christian nationalist, extremist political agenda that goes back an awful long way. And other than William Jennings Bryan back in the 1920s, who was kind of a Bernie Sanders leftist, who was also deeply anti-evolutionist, it's really hard to find a not hyper-conservative anti-evolutionists anywhere in the anti-evolution canon from Darwin on down to the present. And so if anybody can find an example, you might find kind of at the edges a Tom Wolfe type might be kind of riffing off of the intelligent design camp and skeptical of some elements of it. That would be as close as you could kind of get to a lot of the liberal perspective on things. So it would make him more kind of a counterpart with Robert Kennedy Jr. Being a liberal and an anti-vaxxer crazy person. But it is extremely difficult to find examples of that. So if anybody knows of anybody who could be deemed a left-wing progressive anti-evolutionist, let me know. I'd be intrigued to find out about them. There may be some lurking around in the internet somewhere, but it's not a field that I found any examples of. You do get some interesting examples of anti-creationists who can have their own little screwball viewpoints. I can think of Ian Plimer, very strident anti-creationist from Australia, and he's also a climate science denier. And then there's also, like, Conspiracy Central, this fellow that was associated with the Synthase Journal from back, I think, in 2013. That's a thing that we'll have to be delving into that probably in a later book. But it's on the burner. There's an awful lot of things that need to be discussed. Even we cannot scram everything into one fell swoop, and I think it's going to be a tight hoe for the print size for our bibliography on the second book to cover all of the stuff that we deal with, because a lot of it is very citation heavy, including the cosmology chapter, and a lot of our material on the more recent ins and outs, Gunter Beckley crowd and all that. There's just a lot of source citations that you really need to be keeping track of so that you can keep a grip on it to get a good sense of the trajectory of things. So anyway, that covers things reasonably well. I don't see anybody in the live stream, so presumably people will be showing up perhaps after it's on or watching it, as is typically the mode afterwards. Let me put our thank you note for people who are helping our that we are very much appreciative of all the assistance that people are continuing to do over the years. We recognize, feel that public support, that we're getting into really dicey economic times, what with the idiot Trump in charge. And I think it's going to get a lot darker before it gets a lot brighter. So everybody that's stuck with me all this time, thank you very much. And make sure that you are making your own ends meet before you bother about me. As much as I appreciate everything you do, everybody's got to keep their own powder dry. So I will bear that in mind, even though at the same time I say, please, everybody help and continue to help in the patron department. Oh, hello, Vesta. Yes, we had a you tend to come in about halfway through the show, and that's so it's if I start at the early hour, which I did just shortly after noon this time, or midnight. But anyway, as a reprise to catch you up to date, and the signal has occasionally been a little dicey. We were going into the ongoing selective citation of Sarfati and Tay on which dinosaurs are birds or not. And fortunately, we'll be able to be putting the links up to that element. And then the Royal Truman episode and his hyperbolic Kulturkampfing things that Joel Duff has commented on. And then this hilarious little mind bit about an AIGA video where he mentions the Da Vinci dinosaur. And that one is just so beautiful. It'll be intriguing to see if any creationists down the line draw attention to all of this. A little creationist who was citing the video was just waving it at us when asked, did you fact check any of it? Naturally, Craig did not say so, because Craig never fact checks it. Hasn't been fact checking for years, and certainly is not going to start now. So that one is a fun little thing to keep a broad base of stuff that will connect you up with what current creationism is doing. So let's put our advert up for Rocks Volume 1. If I can get my little magic box to run again. And getting some of its little running this time, and so it's probably a little slow on my end. And hopefully we are sharing, and away we go. We are certainly, Jack and I, very, very proud of Rocks Were There Volume 1, as well as my earlier Evolution Slam Dunk. And we've been learning more and more about the techniques and the range of things. So we're constantly raising the bar of the amount of material that we have access to and the analysis that we're dealing with. So much of the mythology and religious history aspects, cultural history stuff, that's going to be coming in very extensively in the second volume, because volume 1 wasn't talking about the flood geology stuff. And volume 2 will be addressing that. That's where we're going to have the Grand Canyon section. I'm currently working on the whales section right now. Got the little pile of material ready to go for the Ark Encounter chapter, which will be the first comprehensive breakdown of their kind list, which is the smallest. Their basic Answers in Genesis has actually been helpful in putting a gauntlet that draws a, there's a mixed metaphor, a gauntlet drawing a line in the sand, that I don't think any creationist is going to be able to get past, because their listing of about 1,500 kinds is probably as small as you could possibly manage. That means they are stuck with family level baraminology, and that isn't necessarily helping their case. But even as it is, at that family level, there are enough ambiguities between what one creationist is saying versus what another creationist is saying. Plus, in quite a few instances, Answers in Genesis, they've just slipped in evolutionary ancestors as the created kind. And so you've got just a fascinating issue. Whereas the Ark Encounter thing is falling apart at that level. How much worse it is for John Woodmarapp, who was thinking way more kinds, like 20,000, where there's simply not room enough on the Ark for that. And of course, that means also it's a reinforcement of a thing that's a truism for anybody that's studied in this area, that it has long been the case that it is impossible for creationists to hold with created species, even though they require that for our species as an exception, because they just can't fit them on the Ark. And so that dynamic of how much hyperspeciation is required is just coming as an inevitable result of the necessity that they have to be able to whittle the number of kinds down. And that means they've got to have kinds operating at family level. And there's enough taxonomical ambiguity that makes it a dicey operation, as we will be showing in the book. So that'll be yet another chapter and element that will be the first of its kind, along with the breakdown of the anthropic arguments, the discussions of the huge range that creationists have for dating the flood. AIG and ICR's Usher era, 2348 BCE, is only one little slice of how many dates the creationists have given. And that'll all be thoroughly documented. There's going to be a lot of stuff in here that I think will be very, very useful. Plus, we'll be doing a nice summary of the whole human evolution chapter and issues about the current state of the art. In many respects, it's extremely difficult to outdo. Erica has done this on the video level, but we'll be doing our darndest to get it coordinated in print, and also a sense, as usual, again, of what creationists have been doing in terms of evading the issues and goalpost moving, and the ambiguity they have for some of these Homo erectus, Australopithecine, Homo habilis era ones, plus just wacky stuff that keeps hitting in place. We still get references now and then to the idea that fully modern anatomical humans are known from like deposits that are supposedly 4 million years old. Good luck trying to find them to give us an actual source documenting that. It's just a trope that floats around in the creationist literature, and along with a few other tropes, where we'll be probably in an info box, breaking down the issues about who plays up the Piltdown Nebraska man pairing. That's one that I've noticed over the years is almost uniquely restricted to young Earth creationists. And that means it's so restricted that it's functionally a diagnostic, that if somebody is joined at the hip, bring up Nebraska man and Piltdown man, it's very probably the trawling off of young Earth creationist apologetics, because that pairing isn't a thing over in intelligent design apologetics, or for that matter, old Earth creationist, which is basically Ross reason to believe bunch today. So the scholarly scalpel and or the scholarly searchlight that we are putting on magnifying glass, there's multiple mixed metaphors there, should, I think, be very helpful in putting volume 2 as a indispensable compendium, bringing everybody up to speed on the mid-2020s versions of creationism, as well as indicating pathways that we have to go. The previous book was written in the tail end of the first Trump administration, and here we are in the midst of the second Trump administration, which brings a feature that, for me, it's genuinely puzzling that there's been no attempt to go after evolution in the Trump 2.0. And even though they are trying to backwards to call the extremist right-wing anti-trans, anti-gay marriage, anti-immigrant subculture that's swirling around Tony Perkins' brand of creationism, there's been virtually no sign I can see of any assistance that's being done at the Trump level. And it's probably because, one, he doesn't give a shit, that he has no interest in this whatsoever. He's not a sciencey person. He's perfectly fine to grump about windmills because that annoys him that he can see windmills off of the coast from his Scottish golf course. That's personal for him. But how trilobite evolution or hominid evolution runs just doesn't interest him. And therefore, there's no wind coming from the top down. Now, if the Project 2025 entrenchments can get Kulturkampfing placed to the point where they can make some headway in this area, it's not impossible that there might be some effort in this regard. But they've certainly had 1.5 terms worth of playtime to show their inclinations in this area if they were going to do so. And so I think all of the obsessions that Trump has in his interest groups that he's fiddling around with, evolution is really not high on their agenda. And it may very well be that we will post-Trump era without that ever actually happening. So we will see what that is or is not. That gets us kind of up to speed on that. We had a big cool snap here. Got a little flurry of snow, although ironically more snow over in Seattle than here. I didn't have to worry about even trying to shovel my walk because it was melting off. And we are supposed to be up to about 60 degrees by Tuesday. So I am happy as camper if we can get a little bit of warmth in our area and keep it that way, so I can turn down my electric heaters and stuff and get back to saving up money for other things than keeping the electrics heaters going. So anyway, everybody stay safe. Watch out for the wooden penguin. Watch out for idiot agents running around making life a mess for people. To some extent, the sheer incompetence of the Trump administration has meant that they've blundered up and down the yin-yang and are likely to continue to blunder, and in the post-Trump years are going to be spending most of their time in court working through all the lawsuits that are going to be generated for people's rights being violated and laws being violated by these people, even though the God King Emperor himself will be presumably deemed immune from prosecution thanks to our doltish Trumpista Supreme Court. But all is open, all is flux. Stay safe, and we will be seeing all you kids next week.